Hi, everybody. Welcome to Environmental Science. I'm your instructor for the semester, Kimberly Tor. So we're going to jump right in with week one. So make sure you've got pen and paper and you're ready to take notes, just as if we were in a classroom together, sitting face to face in a regular old school classroom, right? So no difference here. So please take notes, be active, pause the videos when you need to pause them, rewind them, watch them again and again. Let's jump in. If I were to ask you to define environmental science, could you come up with a definition? If nothing jumps to mind, I'd encourage you to pause the video and write out a definition. It's what I would ask you to do if we were in a classroom together. Everybody write down their definition of environmental science, and we'll see what we come up with. Okay, I'm waiting. And through the magic of video recording, we're here. So let's see what we've got. What did you come up with? Here's a nice, succinct definition that will unpack bit by bit so we truly understand it. Environmental science is the interdisciplinary study of humanity's relationship with the biotic and the abiotic environment. Okay, so that's a lot, and it's kind of concise and packed in there. So let's start with this term, interdisciplinary. So your textbook has this color wheel figure, which I actually like quite a bit, which shows environmental science in the center, and then surrounding that, all the different disciplines. So environmental science, by its very nature, is interdisciplinary, which just means lots of disciplines are used and relied on in order for us to really understand our environment. So you see ecology, biology, and chemistry, of course, atmospheric science. All of these things are necessary components for understanding how our ecosystems work, how our climate works, and therefore when we shift and alter those systems, we're aware of that. We're also aware of what it takes to restore those systems back to a healthy place. Oceanography, geology, anthropology, reminding us that the human component of environmental science is a big piece of that puzzle. And so excluding humans from any environmental decision would be folly, right? Political science, history, engineering, economics, ethics. We'll talk about economics, we'll talk about ethics. Really, we'll hit on quite a few of these disciplines as we move through the field of environmental science. Okay, let's talk about our planet. So very briefly, let's talk about the living parts of our planet and the non-living parts of our planet. So we're going to talk about these two terms a lot throughout the semester. And as part of our definition of environmental science, let's make sure we understand what biotic means. Biotic means living. That prefix of bio, of course, means life. So biology, the study of living things. And abiotic means without life. So that little prefix of A means without. And so things that are abiotic are non-living. Okay, so I would encourage you again to pause and make a quick list of everything you can think of in the world, okay, quickly, that's alive, and things that are non-living in our environment. And if we were in class, we would be doing this on paper. I'll pause, I'll wait. And we're back. Okay, so the biotic, the living component of the environment. So I'm looking around my space right now, and I see my cats. Myself, we're all alive. I see trees outside. I've got a house plant in the corner, and I cannot see, but I do know that there's tons of bacterial species living in me and on me, in my cat, on my cat, all over the place. So there's a lot of living organisms just in my tiny little environment right now. Here's a list I came up with that hits on the big ticket items, if you will, things we think about, all the animal groupings and bacteria and fungi, protists, which are mostly teeny tiny unicellular beings. Amoeba would be a protist. And notice that we've included humans, and we've teased humans out as a subgroup to remind us that we must always include humans in that process. Okay, my abiotic environment. I'm looking around my house. Well, the house I'm living in is pretty abiotic. My computer, my cell phone, never far, right? The glass I'm drinking out of right now, pen. I'm thinking about the air I'm breathing, oxygen, nitrogen gas, the energy, the electricity that's running my computer, the clothes I'm wearing, my glasses, lots of that stuff that's abiotic in my environment, and then other things in the broader ecosystem out there like wind, atmosphere, substrate, soil particles, elements like nitrogen and phosphorus, temperature, disturbances like hurricanes and fire. All of these things are not living, but part of our abiotic environment and really important for understanding how a healthy ecosystem functions. We're going to highlight humans yet again to remind ourselves not to exclude people from our discussions because we are ever present in our environment and constantly affecting that. So in environmental science, we're studying in an interdisciplinary way, right? And we're studying both the biotic and the abiotic components of our environment. And it's really the relationship between humans and those components of their environment. Okay, some questions for you. Let me move me. There we go. Should the present generation conserve resources for the future generation? Excellent question. So I'd like you to think to yourself. You don't necessarily have to write an answer to this, but I do want you to be honest with yourself. How do you feel about that? What's your first thought? If you think about it for a little while longer, does that perspective for you shift or change? Should we be conserving resources for the future generations? Now, it's hard for me to think that anybody would say no, that anybody would answer no to this question, right? It's all about me, it's all about today, and forget about the future. Nobody's really going to say that. But a more interesting look at the question would be, if we answer yes, do our actions and the way we use our resources reflect how we feel about that question? That's a little bit more interesting. Another question, is it okay to destroy a forest to create jobs for people? How do you feel about that? Now, everybody's perspective is going to be different, and I want to point out that there is no right or wrong answer to these questions. There really is not. So one thing that I want to make really clear as we start working together this semester is that although this is an online course, we are still a classroom, and we're still going to be interacting with each other and discussing with each other, offering viewpoints which may be disparate or different. We're going to be offering opinions about things. Would you, should you, could you, right? And so we want to recognize that for a lot of what we discuss, there is no right or wrong way to feel. The science is steadfast, and that's just based on facts, so that's not in question. But it's our feeling about and our opinion about how we utilize that to make decisions in society and moving forward. Are humans justified in driving other species to extinction? Another great question. Everybody's going to have a different viewpoint on that. And again, most people, I think, would answer that we might be justified in certain cases, but nobody wants extinction. Nobody's voting for that. Nobody is seeking to achieve that. And yet our actions have led to that in the past and may continue to lead to that in the future. We know that Mother Nature has been pushing extinction forward all on her own, long before humans entered the stage. And we'll talk about that as we get into biological diversity and extinction. But humans have been speeding up that process for sure. Okay, and then finally, I'd like to have us consider, is it okay for some communities to be exposed to more pollution than others? And how do we feel about that? Are some communities exposed to more pollution than others? Absolutely they are. And in the United States, in particular, it tends to be communities of color. It tends to be communities that are struggling socioeconomically. So there are poorer communities, poor Black communities, poor brown communities. And what we want to acknowledge as we move forward in our coverage of environmental justice and environmental racism is that these things do occur, and acknowledging them forces us to ask ourselves whether or not we feel this is just or ethically okay. How do we feel about that? So again, there are no right or wrong answers here, but I want us to sort of think about these as we launch into the semester. And then in the next video lecture, we'll talk a little bit about environmental ethics, which is really what these questions are all about. Extending our ethical viewpoints of right and wrong and morality to not just between people, human to human, but now between humanity and the environment. Okay. Another thing I'd like for us to point out in the beginning of the semester is the difference between these two terms. Environmental science is not the same thing as environmentalism. They are kind of intertwined because their fields of interest are similar, but they are actually quite different. So let's make sure we see that, and let's make sure we understand that. So let's start with the definition of environmentalism, right? Environmentalism is a social movement. So this is advocacy for. So to advocate for or to work toward protecting the natural environment and protecting it from anything really, but oftentimes from pollution, destruction, or degradation. So remember that advocacy, being an advocate for somebody or an advocate for something, means to be a voice for that person or that thing when that voice is not possible or doesn't exist. So the environment can't speak for itself, right? So we advocate for the environment. And whether you speak for the trees or you'd like to protect water resources, wherever your heart is in that environmentalism realm, or whether you're not really in the advocacy mindset, all of these things are okay. But this would be a form of advocacy. And environmentalism differs from, let me pop out here for a second, differs from environmental science in that environmental science is a true hard and fast science and a scientific way that we study our environment and our interactions with it. And as such, we seek to be unbiased. Just the facts, right? Just studying observations and data, which of course we cannot do if we're advocating for something at the same time. So the lines between those two can sometimes be blurred. And by that I mean the environmentalists that are lobbying for trees and clean water understand that they need to do those things because the environmental science community has alerted them to the fact that those portions of our ecosystem might be in need of protection. So they're relying on the data and the science to know where to voice their advocacy. And, you know, when you're thinking about getting into a career or an area of study, we often go to places and areas where we're interested and where we find our hearts, right? Places where we are interested in studying. And so oftentimes you'll find environmental scientists, while maybe they may or may not be advocates out and outright, but they care about the environment. Dare I say, they might even love it. So again, a nice definition and distinction between those terms. Okay. The last thing I want to mention, just as a quick launch into our semester, is this word, sustainability. So I'd like you to pause this for a second and see if you can write down a definition for sustainability. What does it mean to you to be sustainable? And again, if we were in a classroom, I would wait. And we're back. So here's a great definition of sustainability that's short and sweet and to the point. Meeting our needs today without compromising the needs for future generations. Having enough for today and saving enough for tomorrow. To be sustainable in that. And for environmental science, in order to meet those sustainability goals, It takes some doing, and it does become sort of the holy grail, if you will, of goals for this subject area. And it'll be something that we continue to come back to throughout the semester. No matter what we're talking about, we always come back to this idea of sustainability. So it's almost like the hub of what we talk about in environmental science. Sustainability is like the ultimate goal for us, right? So if you look at sustainability, sustainable development in the center of this figure here in red, you'll notice that there are three sort of tenets to that. Up at the top, we have environmentally sound decisions. Now that's absolutely necessary. If you're going to move forward and make decisions about the environment using science and facts and data, they better be good ones, and they need to be environmentally and scientifically sound. So that's kind of straightforward. In one corner, we also have economically viable decisions. So whatever decision we decide to make to move forward towards a sustainable goal, to protect the environment, to minimize destruction, whatever that might be, we have to be able to afford it. Economically viable decisions are absolutely necessary. There's amazing technology worldwide for clean, green energy, sustainable power, but if it's not affordable for everybody that needs to use it, it's not going to be a viable solution. So it's got to be affordable. And our third tenet, the third corner of this, socially equitable decisions, whatever we decide to do in moving forward towards a sustainable planet, it needs to be fair for everybody involved. It needs to be just, right? So if it's fair for people that can afford it, but it's unfair for people that can't, it's not going to move us in the direction that we need to be moving. It needs to be socially just, racially just, culturally just, environmentally just, economically affordable, and based on sound environmental science if we're going to reach that holy grail of sustainable development. So it's a good thing for us to remember. Not easy to achieve. Simple in design, but simple doesn't mean easy. Okay. So as we move forward in our semester, we're going to be talking about a lot of these concepts, and we're going to target each one as we move forward, and I look forward to doing that with you. Okay. See you next time.